discuss. Thank you all for coming, and thank you all for participating in the panel today. Thank you, Habib, for handling all of this. And I'm just going to introduce Habib, who will chair the panel, and the title is the name of the book we're analyzing, The Smartest Kids in the World and How They Got That Way. And so, Habib, if you'd like to introduce the panel and just take it away.
Well, thank you for having us, and thank you for spending your afternoon with us. Rob suggested we read this book, and if 10 or more people read this book, they will have 10 different interpretations of the book, and you can question the data and so forth and on. But overall, if you read it, you see that there are so many points mentioned in this book that worth this panel discussing this book. Being a math teacher, mathematics is going through a lot of changes these days, at least developmental mathematics, through different mandates by state, by federal governments, and so forth and so on. And I thought maybe we can learn a few things from this book and from education system of other countries. Maybe we can start implementing these things, but wishful thinking. So I'm going to hand the talk to my colleagues.
I'll go first. Since I'm going to go first.
Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Okay, I'm Mike Green. I teach psychology. And was given the opportunity to read this book about a month ago. Not much preparation. And I was given the task of, there are 3 countries that were primarily addressed. So since I'm going first, I'll just introduce how the author approached this. The author used foreign exchange students, American foreign exchange students, in 3 different countries, Poland, Finland, and Korea, to both provide a witness to the process, sort of an insider's look at the educational reforms and measures. Those 3 countries in particular, because they scored so high on the PISA test. PISA is a general test taken by over 40,000 students worldwide that is used to compare. So when they say someone is much higher, that's one of the tests they use. So I have the task of presenting at least some of the reforms in Poland. And in Poland, the dramatic changes really have been since 2000. A new minister of education was introduced in 1997. And he immediately made some dramatic changes. Now, you have to think of these changes in light of the historical processes Poland has been and had been through a couple of wars, had been invaded, a communist bloc country, so there were a number of things that were impeding education. He came in through the democratic reforms and instituted 3 really primary changes. The first one was to immediately increase the qualifications of teachers. A master's degree became required, as well as teacher training. If any of you have been in teacher training, you know it's 1 semester. You watch a teacher and you teach some lessons and create some lesson plans. They thank you and go away and teach. Here, it was at least a year, and it was intensive, constantly provided feedback, truly teacher training and teaching training, the methodology. The other is to the ensured equal access to all students, something that we suggest is in the United States, but in rural areas in Poland, they have substandard schools, brought all the schools up to equal level. And, interesting concept, third was introduced a brand new core curriculum and required all students to go through the core curriculum. And in order to get the outcomes, everybody's excited about student learning outcomes, required standardized tests for all students across the country. Standardized tests are somewhat like SATs, they're not quite as severe as in Korea. But the students have certain dates where they take the tests. There we go. The other part, and I'll finish up, the other part in Poland was tracking, particularly in secondary schools. We have attempted in the United States to untrack students. We know what tracking is. Ability groups. Now everybody, since everyone is excellent in the United States, we have no mediocre students. We have no ability grouping. Well, in Poland, they ability grouped at 15 by giving the standardized test, and you automatically were placed in either an academic or vocational track. He delayed that until 16. And up until then, all the students stayed in the same schools, requiring the same core curriculum, which really brought up the standards for all. Let's see, the last thing that I'm going to mention is the expectations are very high for all the students to succeed, as well as the teachers to create those expectations. So, taken together in a decade and a half, they dramatically increased student scores, outcomes, participation in school, and success in schools.
So Linda and I shared Korea. That was our country. So I'm going to talk about kind of the upside of that system, and then Linda's going to talk about some of the things that they may not be so proud of or weren't necessarily the most positive features of it. The first thing was focus. And the focus was mastering the rigorous material. And in contrast, the United States schools have, learning is not the only focus in schools. We have sports, we have extracurricular activities. And so one of the things they highlighted, that school was school, and it was about learning, and that was it. And they also mentioned that you would think that technology was just all over the place there in the schools, but they had very little iPads or all of these interactive chalkboards. I mean, they described the schools as nothing fancy, faded chalkboards. The only technology were the mics that the teachers had. And so, you know, the focus was really on this rigorous material. Second was that there were really clear, predictable consequences for the student. So everyone was clear that the result of this college entrance exam was tied to what their life was going to be like in the future. So if you had a good score, you had a good future. And they pointed out that in the United States, a lot of times consequences for tests have more effect on the school itself. There's a label put on them, or the teachers will experience some sort of consequences that doing poorly on our standardized tests rarely have consequences for the student. And also that everybody knew what the consequences were, so it was just very predictable. You knew what it led to. The third thing was tireless effort. And so these students would spend many years prior to the test studying, planning, and they said even praying that they did well. They had a long school day, often until 9 p.m. And then there was this after-school life, where the private tutoring industry was huge. And so one of the things that they said was that historically, people think that this high performance was just something historically that Koreans, they excelled in these tests. But the private tutoring industry went way, way back, so many years, that really it's just this effort that they put into doing well. It's not just something natural that people have sort of ascribed to them. And then the last thing was the whole community really emphasized the importance of this test. It was offered one day a year. If you didn't do well, you could take it again, but you had to wait until the next time it was offered, which is different from our SATs and ACTs. It's offered so many times. This was one day, and on that one day, the whole community, planes were grounded during the time of the test to eliminate noise. Taxi rides were free to students to get to school. Power lines were checked weeks before to make sure everything was working properly. Roads were kept clear. So it was really a community effort to make sure the students on that day of the test did their best. So that was.
Now, and the positives. And there were actually 60,000 students who would take that test on any one day. And like Heidi said, it was a national effort. Everybody in the whole nation, everything stopped. And so the kids from a very young age knew that they were going to be taking this test. It was at the end of when they were 15, is that right? 16. So the downside, it started with Eric, of course. Eric was the student who went there, and he was from Minnesota. But it talked about, the author actually interviewed the Minister of Education, who said that your President Obama has glowing rhetoric about the Korean education system, but he stated, this was his quote, "Americans see a bright side to Korean education, but Koreans are not happy with it." In fact, I think that was across the board in all the countries. The people there aren't really happy with it. The students still hate school. They still have teachers they don't like. So there were some commonalities there. So the author said that their belief is that they created a monster, and the system became overly competitive, leading to an unhealthy preoccupation with test scores and a dependence on private tutoring academies. And so that they gave this warning to the rest of the world that competition had become an end unto itself and not the learning it was supposed to motivate. It created a steady crazed culture that was driving children mad. So they still said, and a positive from all these countries, is that the quality of an educational system cannot exceed the quality of its teachers. So the teacher quality was #1, as in Finland and Poland. And as Heidi said, Korean schools existed so students could learn complex academic material and not for sports or anything else. So 3 things Eric learned. Countries can change. Rigor matters. Winning the competition could become the goal in and of itself. Families and kids could lose sight of the purpose of learning and fixate excessively on rankings and scores. And so he said the students he talked to despised the system. They absolutely loved it, he said, and you couldn't wait to get home. But they have the good test scores. I think another thing in all the countries, as here, was that's really important is that the drive of the students and the drive of the parents, because all 3 of these countries have experienced pretty recent history poverty. So the parents want those kids to get a quality education. They know that if they don't do well on that test, they won't get into college, then they won't have a good career. So their whole lives, they don't test the kids like we do in the US all the time. So they're always getting ready for a test. But the kids know at the end of high school, they're going to take that major test. And so then we have what was the name for that, Hagwons? The Hagwons, where kids, first when Eric got there, he went to this huge class of students, auditorium full of students, and the teacher was up there just lecturing away with a mic, but a lot of the class the members were asleep, and he could not understand. He'd heard such great things about the education in this country, and he couldn't understand why the kids were sleeping. Then he found out pretty quickly that the kids left school about 4. They had a short break, and then they went to Hagwons at 9 for their private tutoring. So they might be in school until midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning. At one point, the country proposed a curfew where the kids could not be out after a certain hour, and so they would go and close these Hagwons down, and check on them during the middle of the night. So I think that's a major difference in comparing, Korea with students here is because we test everybody and they test everybody too, but there doesn't seem to be that drive among the whole there is a drive among the country, but the drive with the parents and making sure they're gonna get into a good college, and so that was a difference.
I'm Lana Myers from English, and I covered Finland. And Finland was described by, Commander Ripley in this book as having the highest PISA scores, the problem solving the program for international student assessment. And it's interesting, Mike was talking about the PISA exam, and as she described it, Ripley described it as very focused on critical thinking and writing skills and problem solving skills rather than multiple choice tests like we often have here to pigeonhole our students. So that was interesting. The foreign exchange student who went to Finland was from Oklahoma, and it was described as the school that she went to was not very challenging, and she had a real rude awakening when she went to Finland. And so Ripley mentions that it's ironic that Finland is so successful now educationally because they were a literate farming and logging nation not 40 years ago. And she mentioned in the 1970s, they basically had what we have now, kind of a centralized No Child Left Behind program, but even more intensified. They had standardized textbooks. They had people popping in all the time to observe them. They had no control of the teachers over their curriculum. And that wasn't working. They were low in their test scores. So they changed things around in the 80s and the 90s, and they did, as Mike mentioned with Poland, they decided their core value was to improve the quality of teachers, and that would improve everything else. So there is about 8 teacher training programs in all of Finland, and they're very difficult to get into. She described it as hard to get in there as to get into MIT or medical school. And you do have to have a master's degree to teach, and you also, when you do your teacher training, it's very intensive. You have like 3 mentors, not just one that has to approve you and pass you on and get you to the next level in your teaching. And also it was described that their graduate program, they write 20-page papers about novels, poems, short stories. They do a lot of critical analysis because they want the teachers, when they are teaching the students, to do that, to have the critical thinking skills and to focus on writing and logic and argument and all those things. So that was interesting. One other thing about Finland, one thing, it's just interestingly to know, one of the foreign exchange students from Oklahoma noticed that there was no police officers in the Finland schools. There was also no whiteboards, no special technology. It was just your traditional chalkboard, very few computers. It wasn't, again, about technology that's making them successful. So, and I guess the foreign exchange student from Oklahoma, Kim, the students would be so dedicated to their work in Finland, and she would, ask a couple, why are you doing all this? Why are you so motivated? And said, well, why wouldn't you be? Don't you want to have a good job one day? Don't you want to be successful? Like, that's just their culture. If you're the kid that slacks off, people there would look down on you. It's not cool to be behaving in that manner. So it's very interesting, Finland, how successful they are. Oh, and also the kids are less likely to play sports. Academics are the focus, and they're far less likely to have a job after school, like our kids.
Thank you. So, commonalities. Teacher prep, people's attitude. You mentioned that the children in Korea were, they loathe in school. I mean, our students do too. Do you rather have the one that they loathe and are good, or the loathe are bad? So it is amazing. I have been a father of 2 young kids. They come home and say, yeah, they don't have any life. They just sit down and study and study and study. They talk about their classmates. And I want to have fun. So I'd rather sit down and study than have fun. Teachers. one of the things that I was talking to a friend, over here, anything happens, they blame the teachers, as he said, quote unquote, the soft targets, you know. We do have good teachers, but we need more. What do you think about that? Do we have good teachers? Do we, in grade school?
Well, I think what was interesting to me, and I'm from the education department, I didn't say that before. You know, what they said was that they invested so much in high teacher quality that they're making the curriculum, a core curriculum, or setting the standards, the government setting the standards became less important. Because the more you trained your teachers and the higher quality of the teachers, the more autonomous they could be in coming up with the rigorous material and methods and strategies themselves. And so, you know, I thought that was really interesting. They kind of let that part go, because if you put the money in on the front end, then they had more confidence in the decision making of the teachers on the back end.
And I think that we as a country spend so much on testing now and benchmarking and data people be in our district to disaggregate data instead of putting it into the quality of the teacher. In Finland, for example, when they do have to be in the top third of their graduating class from high school to even be accepted into education. It's like being accepted into medical school or law school. It's very prestigious, so therefore the teachers are respected. Then the first
And
3
they're
years.
paid well.
And they're paid well, just like doctors and lawyers, exactly. They're paid well, they're respected, and then they're free to teach. Our teachers are micromanaged, you know, but, yeah, they said that, the teachers, anyway, I just think there's a real difference, not only in the home, the parents are driven for their kids to get a good education, that has always happened here. But I do think we have some good teachers, but I think a lot of great teachers, I'm in education too, have left the field because of the testing and feeling like they have to teach to a test. So I think we've kind of lost sight of, it's not just the test. In these countries, they don't test all the time. If they test, the teacher's deciding to test. Like in Finland, they have, you know, their first 3 years in college, when they're accepted into education as a field, is pedagogy, education courses, and then they have their fourth year is with a master teacher, and then their masters, fifth and sixth year, are under the supervision of a mentor teacher. So by the time they get through with those 6 years, then they're trusted to decide how to teach, the curriculum, the methodology, the tests they're going to give the kids, and there's just a lot more respect. Don't you think that's the difference?
Was the rigorous sports program common among these 3 countries? Not
No.
having?
No.
They don't have any, okay.
Very little sports.
No sports.
They explain.
Poland didn't mention much about sports, but particularly on the others. School was school. That was the student's job.
Did they mention trade school at all, for those who didn't have the academic?
Particularly in Poland, there was a track, and they moved them into vocational school, but it was still high quality. It was still training for better jobs, and it was still rigorous.
And prestigious.
And prestigious. It
That's our
wasn't.
problem
It
here,
wasn't.
right? We don't believe in
you know,
trade
It's
schools.
either academic or, well, you
Yeah.
can go to community college.
Right.
It was rigorous. It was still, and the teachers were still respected, and the direction was respected. It just depended on your overall scores and where you were. I think, in my opinion, now in the United States, and I'm noticing in my students more and more, and I mention it because normal curve, everyone can't be an A student. Everyone can't be the top engineer, but everyone thinks they are. And our society has gotten to the point where no one wants or thinks they can fail. And failure in certain aspects, I don't think is bad. It's a learning experience. You learn strategies not to do that again.
Yeah, go ahead.
We talked about like how
about how the parents at a very young age were very involved in the education of their children at home, not
At
at
home.
school, but at home. In fact, they would help them with their work at home. And as they got to be teenagers, they were freer. The teenagers were freer once they became older. There was yeah.
But the students had learned the responsibility, they learned the importance of the school system and the outcomes. The Koreans hated the school system, but they did not do the work.
They learn persistence also from their parents and, from home also, persistence and doing quality work and.
They also described, they gave the difference of the role of parents. They said that Korean parents were coaches and that they cared about their kids, spent less time attending school events and more time training their kids at home, reading them, quizzing them, having conversations about different things. And they said that U.S. parents were more like boosters, like the #1 fans, and that was a distinct difference between the parenting and that role of, not just cheering them along, but, really helping them achieve.
I mean, I could, don't look up there. I can remember, some of you who are your children, I can remember not missing one. My son was a diver, my daughter was a cheerleader, so I get to see a lot of diverse sports. And my other son was a golfer. So I attended every event, and then I look back and realized, but I never went to anything at school.
They did talk about how there wasn't any positive research to support the idea of like a PTA like we have here, where the parents went into the school and they did bake sales and they brought brownies for birthdays. There wasn't that kind of involvement. The involvement that shows in the research to be effective is the involvement of the parent in the home. Yeah.
Didn't they say that the correlation in America was actually negative to parent
Yes.
involvement versus student success?
Yes, it did.
Because the parental involvement is often with respect to sports and non-academic aspects.
Yes, yeah.
The countries I'm hearing, correct me if I'm wrong, are of course smaller in geographic area than the United States, smaller in population, and I'm assuming more ethnically homogeneous than the United States. Am I correct?
Yes.
But yes, but Ripley did make the point that, let's say Finland, if you compare it to, let's say, somewhere that's homogeneous like Rhode Island in terms of student population and demographics, Rhode Island should, if that was all that mattered, or if that was important, then they should score just as well as Finland did, but Rhode Island doesn't. So there's something else going on. But it's a point.
Well, Ripley mentioned that there are a lot of immigrants from Northern Africa and Middle East that are entering Finland in recent years, so the ethnicity, the proportion is changing now.
Yes.
You know, it might also, let us point out that the PISA exam does not have a randomized sample. So the data is terrible.
Relatively biased.
It's extraordinarily biased. It's if people just sign their schools up to have this, self-selected. So it's not surprising that the scores maybe in Rhode Island might not be representative of what students are really capable of in Rhode Island.
I'm an advisor, I'm Ann Hansen, and the reason I came over is I'm actually working for the Department of Education. I'm a field interviewer collecting the data for CAC. And it's actually called ISIS here right now, International Study of Adult Skills. And without knowing what these people are answering, because they're answering a computerized assessment, I'm not sure what your point was about the random sampling. Are you talking about from the international countries or from
The PISA
US?
exam. The PISA exam,
Uh-huh.
whether it's in
Whether it's
Poland
done
or
there.
Finland or Korea or the United States,
Uh-huh.
the sample is not a good sample, and so I'm not sure that the statistics of the PISA are meaningful. I think you can just take it with a grain of salt, throw it out.
Wow. Without being, I'm not a statistician and I don't work in DC, but I do know that there is a certain protocol. Right now, we're looking for people in 2 target areas. They're 19 to 24-year-olds, which are the students we have here. And then the late in life, almost retirees, 66 to 74-year-olds. We're also doing a prison population. And I think we'll probably be surprised at how well some of our prisoners are doing compared to our own population. But at any rate, I'm enjoying collecting the data. It's been fascinating. Things keep coming out every couple of months. But it is run by the Department of Education, and it's called ISIS here. So that's why I had to come to this meeting. I had to hear comments. So thanks.
I have two questions. I was wondering if any of you wanted to comment on that. One was you mentioned Minister of Education in Korea is actually American educated, or Poland. Which one is the country? Minister of Education is educated in the United States. I think it's Korea. He's a Korean. And then he wants to adopt educational system of the United States to Korea. I remember reading that.
They didn't say that.
They didn't say. Well, he was trying. He mentioned something like that. So he didn't say they want to copy that education system, or.
But he's not pro the system in Korea.
Okay.
He doesn't see, he's not happy with it.
Oh, he's not happy with it.
Right.
Okay.
Not in Korea.
Not in Korea. Okay. So he's not trying to copy it, but he's not happy with the system in Korea. He wants to. Okay, take a bit of.
Well, he thinks it's just taken a turn to just focus on the test and not really focus on why we learn, why the kids learn, and why it's important to learn, but they're so focused, it's become so repetitive, and you know, it's all about the kids that can go to tutoring until midnight, you know, they get into best schools.
The other thing I want to ask, did they mention anything about governing bodies of the schools? Who runs them? How they run?
Well, there's, like somebody said, they're so small, don't you think?
They're
like,
small.
they're smaller than, I mean, South Korea's smaller than Minnesota, where Eric came from, you know, I think that's what they said. So if they're run, I mean, South Korea was run by Minister of Education, and so.
As was Poland. And I think the context of these three in particular is that they are used fairly dramatic methods to emerge. And even the Minister of Education who left in Poland realized, how do you then maintain? You can make these dramatic shifts, changes, but then it becomes the test, or it becomes the process. You start losing some of those other aspects.
I have a question. How much play or free time did the kids have during the day at different times?
Well, they focused on the high schools because that's where the exchange students were, so they didn't talk about free.
And I know in Finland, they had some time at night.
And they could go for lunch, they could walk to town, it was.
In Poland, the same thing, they had their nights.
Yeah, and I mean, wasn't Eric who said he went and drank with the guys at night, so when he came, he learned to smoke there, and when he came back, it was really hard to break the smoking habit, but he kept asking his parents, can I have some beer, you know? So they're very trusted, and they must be safe countries.
I have a couple questions. One is, who funds the main school? And who funds the tutoring schools?
That's my question. I know the answer.
So the tutoring schools, that was like just individual companies, like a private
So
market.
private sector.
Silver learning.
Okay,
Exactly,
okay,
exactly.
okay.
Kumon, so just going crazy though. So like they mentioned one person at this one company, he made like $4 million that year. So they called him a rock star teacher. And so the parents and the students would evaluate these tutors, and so then you had ones that were more popular than
Right.
other ones.
And this main school was funded by, I'm sorry, I didn't.
The state.
The state.
For the country.
My other question is, I didn't read the books, this sounds like a K through 12 focus. Here at the
Yes.
college, how can we, what should we learn from this? Because I can't control what they do in the K through 12 system. And it sounds like when they go to college there, we already have a bias sample because they've already been selected. I used to work for an MD in research. He went on one track to be an MD, and his brother went to be a farmer. Not saying one's better than another, but they selected much earlier. So you have a stacked deck of cards from the get-go at the college. So what would you say we could learn from the book that we could sort of implement at the college level? Anything.
My feeling is the main lesson that you can take from this book is that the focus should be on the qualifications of the faculty and not on imposing outcomes or tests or any number of other things imposed by the state. The state ought to focus on funding high-quality faculty and training high-quality faculty, that's it. And let that high-quality faculty do what it does best.
At the college level?
Yes.
You don't think it should
Well, I think-
focus any on having students that have the foundation to build upon once they get to the college?
That's for the state to decide at lower levels. You said at college.
Actually, it's not, because we have tests, math, is that what?
Yeah.
Do you have a developmental math test, or test that would place students in either a developmental math course or a college level course?
The state of Texas just recently imposed such a thing.
We do not in sciences. So our students come in, we don't know what their background is.
We still don't.
But you've got some sort of assessment.
Yeah, we do.
So, we don't. You mentioned a couple of sources of competition for students' time and attention and energy not being present, sports and jobs. I presume these students don't spend hours a day with their faces buried in a screen, textbooking and twittering, and texting and twittering and Facebooking.
I got a big textbook thing.
They have invented a new one.
I got the feeling they still involve themselves in that, but it was indeed in their free time, and they didn't have much free time.
Although the point was made about Finland that they do less homework than Americans.
No.
Or
I think the other point is, Jeff, the other takeaway to me was the expectations, both societally and in the classroom. The expectations are extremely high. Now, of course, they have those external factors as well, but I think if you really expect the student to do well, and don't take, I couldn't do that for an answer, or I need more help, get it. We might, I don't know, stretch people a little bit. I've noticed over the last, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but over the last 4 or 5 years, students have come to expect more to be given and less to be done with the same outcome. Like, no, you really do have to spend time on task.
Did the book mention anything about higher suicide rates and how the parents have to put themselves in the hub to put these children in extra classes at night?
Yeah, particularly in Korea,
Yeah.
the hub ones. Yeah.
Talked about one boy who killed his mother because he didn't do well on his test and he didn't want her to find out and he stuffed her in the, I'm sure those things happen here too, but we did talk about there was such urgency to do well on that test that there was a lot of depression, right?
A lot of depression.
But I wanted to talk, if I can talk about that ability grouping, going back to the ability grouping, and they do track once kids get it at high school. And one thing Poland learned was that when they moved that up a year, instead of tracking at 15 and changing it to 16, that's when they shot up in their scores. And the point that comes from this is, and so they tried that again and they tested the kids again and they found out once they got tracked into that whatever track it was, not the college track, then the scores went down again. It's the expectation. And they brought up a main point, and which I think we're guilty of in the United States too, but they said the US is the only country that starts tracking their kids in elementary school. And so it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like they brought it out with Poland, like once kids know, I'm not smart, I'm not in the GT class, or, and so they get a lot of times more watered down curriculum. They lose the expectation that I can achieve. Instead, they didn't track the kids. They said they didn't mean they didn't have special programs. They still had special help for them, but they expected they would all get there. They didn't label them like we do, like label special ed or label, you know, you're in the GT and you're not in the GT. They just expected all kids to get there, and I think that's huge. Because of, once they, and I have grandkids in kindergarten, and one of them, they're already saying, middle of kindergarten, we want to track her for GT. And it's all because of her experiences she's had, right? So, I thought that was huge.
I have a quick question. It's striking that you pointed out that in Finland and Korea, despite those countries being highly sophisticated technological places, that the schools did not emphasize technology. In fact, in some cases, it looked even backwards with respect to technology. How do you explain that? How do you explain their success in light of the fact, for example, in American education, it's almost a mindless rush to technology?
And I think when you go to texting and Facebook, we're always looking for ways to connect those activities to learning, and that was clearly separate for them. You know, they weren't even thinking about linking learning to whatever those things were. So sometimes I think we try to mix it all together, whatever the attention outside of learning is and whatever the gadgets are, and it just wasn't mixed there.
I don't think she's right, it's money.
Money.
The dollars spent per student was dramatically lower in all three of those countries.
Money for the teachers was dramatically
And there's a
higher.
huge lobby for
Yes.
computers and computer software and.
So in other words, if they had the money, they would $8.
Well, they probably pay the teachers
Yeah, the teachers are going.
instead of buying the computers for the
But
teachers.
the US is second in funding per student, right? Second, and Spain's first.
The place where they use technology, that multi-million-dollar teacher, how much was he getting paid? $4 million, and he, the reason he got so much is because his business was so huge that he had thousands of students out there, and he would be on the computer. I've heard some of our legislators talk about that. We just need to find the best teachers, and increase their class sizes, and get rid of the bad teachers, and give them a keyboard. You know, all these kids can have these little, and they think that that may be the solution, but that's not what these countries are doing, right? Except in their tutoring methods.
Which of these cultures, if any, could be, in a broad sense, characterized as honor and shame-based cultures? Korea, I would guess, but I'm wondering about Poland and Finland. Because the motivation seems to be, people want to get ahead, they want to, they're honored, there's prestige in accomplishing, but there's also a certain level of shame. We don't live in an honor and shame-based culture, Rob.
I want to say the common thing between all of this is a test at the end of the year. And I have experienced the same thing. This test motivate a student that they say we have to be successful and motivate the family. It's like pride for, as you said, for family to have a kid successful going to school.
How do they involve them, they red letters smartest, how do they define smart?
It was primarily on
The PISA.
What's on the piece?
But how do they define, if you're smart, does it mean you have a bunch of knowledge, or you have a bunch of wisdom, I mean, how do they put a spectrum there?
I personally think it's highlighted for a reason. I don't think she really thinks these kids are any smarter. Do you? I think she means they have the high scores. How did they get there? How did they get the, because it's all about the PISA scores.
You know, she said that again and again, the kids are the same in every country, it's just how they're taught and how they react to it.
But they're getting high scores, but are they able to have other kinds of intelligences teacher culture versus the performance outcome-based culture, what's that, creativity? Creativity, yeah, sure. Problem solving, yeah.
There is a background questionnaire in the CAC, and it covers parents' education, even basic health questions. And it does go into some, when you were talking about the shame-based culture, some generic statements that the students would respond to, such as, most people I don't trust, or I don't trust the government. Are you likely, strongly, you know, that kind of thing. There's opinion tolerance, I guess you would call it. There's different areas in that background questionnaire before they do the critical thinking computer part of the test.
So I wonder if we could ask about parents, because, you know, SMART is highlighted, but, you know, there's last year it was Tiger Mom, and then there's also the bell curve and things like, I mean, they're emphasizing SMART. Do we even want to emphasize SMART? This room wants to emphasize SMART, but do our parents want to emphasize SMART? You said fun or happy or something like that. Like, it's not really American to say, I want my kid to be the smartest kid. It's, I want my kid to be happy or well-rounded or successful. So putting them in a, you know, a special group, that's a special parent. That's a tiger mom or a helicopter parent or whatever term that we use. It's really, I think we're more shunned or shamed unless you're part of that very small cadre of parent that puts themselves in the 2% who wants their kids to be in the 2% for intelligence as well. So these books are interesting because we like to poo-poo our, you know, progress and look at other countries, but in reality, even the way you guys set this up, yay, poo-poo, right? It's like yay for this and, you know, boo on that because we're Americans. So it's, again, the smartest being highlighted is fascinating to me because there's happiness, that's a good index. Gross national product might be an index for some. Capital, someone has to make the capital, not just the intellectual capital.
There's another thing too, is for a lot of these students, and my mother-in-law is Japanese, my son goes to Chinese school, so I have a lot of Asian friends. And I know, and speaking to a lot of people, one of the things that happens for a lot of these kids is they finally get accepted into the big college, and then they're burned out by that point. And so they get through, and all they care about is, I'm getting to get the facts down. Even the Tiger Mom lady, she talked about how when she was in school, she said, I don't care about what all this means, I just want to do well on the test, I want to get the facts out of the way. And I think some of them are that way. And the other bad thing is they get put into a career, whether it's doctor or professor or whatever, that's not what they want to do, but because someone said, this is what you should, this is the way you should go, this is what will bring respect and honor. And so they're at something they don't really have a passion for, so they go through the motions. And I think that's one of the interesting things about our culture. If I had been in that culture, and I have a lot of admiration for that culture, I really do, but if I were in that culture, I probably would be out, you know, doing some menial task, because I made so many mistakes and screwed up so much of my life. I would have never been a teacher. But we do have second chances here. We do have, you know, things like community college and things like that here. So I've benefited a great deal from that. So for people that didn't know what they want to do when they were 15, 16 years old, that's the good thing about deciding. Okay, you can figure it out later. Okay, well, there is still a path for you. And I know one guy, he's a biochemist, and he said, when he works with some of these people, he says they sometimes lack some of the creative skills they have here. They don't have a passion for it. It's just something did make good grades, and I went through school and graduate school, and I got the PhD, but I don't have a passion to spend 12, 13 hours a day trying to do research in this area. So obviously there's a balance. And I think the biggest thing is the cultural element. If you have the culture that backs you, the teachers will get paid well. If you don't, you're not going to get paid well. You see your teacher in our culture oftentimes it's like, well, you couldn't make it in engineering. You know, so I think the cultural element's a really, really big deal, and I don't have a big solution for that one.
I think I connected that directly is when we were kids, teachers were, you ask a child, what do you want to be when you grow up? And the stereotypical answer was, well, maybe a doctor, a lawyer, a teacher. Teacher's not in that group anymore.
Yeah.
Teacher is portrayed in the newspapers or in the popular culture as a service provider.
Right.
And don't get paid now.
Right, not a professional.
Right.
And now
That makes a world of difference.
Even the alternate to certification, where you're a content specialist, but with, but with minimal pedagogy and understanding of teaching, I can go teach 5th grade math, or I can go teach 8th grade science. And you may be a really good teacher, but we don't value that expertise.
There are material ways where we disvalue our educators. One way is that at least here in our department, we have 6-to-1 adjunct to full-timers. The adjuncts do not earn benefits, and they are paid very poorly. We keep a highly educated class of people destitute. Is that valuing our educators? Seems to me we have a real problem here.
Did that book had a quantitative metric? There was some tests, you said? Everybody took the test, or how did they do their research and their methods?
There were 65 questions, right?
So everybody, all the Finland students, the
No,
Polish?
no, no, no.
Not,
All students took the test, right?
that's what they were.
Not all the
Yeah.
students in the country.
Yeah, not
No,
all
just a
students.
sample population
Sample.
took
Yeah.
the test?
In the US,
It's
there
not a
were
random sample.
5,233 students in 165 schools. And in all, there were 1/3 teenagers in 43 countries, and it's a 2-hour test.
So this was all over the globe?
It's all
Yeah.
over, but it's
675 countries.
And so what they're trying to do is they're trying to talk about qualitative characteristics and trying to tie them into the quantitative metric, is that the idea?
Yeah, but this starts in primary school. This doesn't start in high school. This starts second, third grade, they're already.
There was a
reading them
quantitative
out.
element in that, and by the way, there were 61 questions in math, reading, and science, but they had a quantitative part of the test in that they did surveys of parents. And it wasn't required, because they didn't get all of it back. From the research they got back, they asked the parents things like, did you read to your children when they were young? One thing they found out, because I'm a reading person, and so they found out that the kids who were most successful had been read to as children and might be a grade and a half ahead of the other kids. So reading aloud to your kids was
So
important.
Poland.
And they asked questions like,
Poland, Finland, and Korea scored
did you
5.
help your children with homework at home, or did you?
You have to have books in the home, and that was another measure that was correlated.
But while the sample size may have been large, the sample was not random by any means. And so it's very difficult to say how meaningful this data is.
I wonder
He-
when
The author of the test posted on his PowerPoint slides, trying to poo-poo the idea that his test is not meaningful. He says, without data, you are just another person with an opinion. So he believes that this is at least data. What I respond, with biased data, you're just another person with a biased opinion.
The book is trying to discuss how these three cultures got these, I guess, very high scores. Went about it totally on different ends of the spectrum. And what happened, and they're trying to discuss, what were their conclusions about it?
Well,
I mean,
she comes up, this is her presentation of these processes. But what she takes away is how to get smart world-class education. And her point is, in order to assess, you've got to then look at the students, and you ask the students, what is a good education? So you have to assess from their point of view, but then she also suggests parental involvement as the parents, what constitutes an education. Obviously, society will point you in a different direction. And then the process, she points then to the principal. The principal is the leader of the campus, so that sets the tone. But she doesn't come up with any solutions, just how you, as a parent, consumer of education, might identify a world-class education.
I hate to sound like NASA, who was self-actualized? Who were the ones that were like happiest? Was it Finland?
I think so. They were.
They weren't miserable like Koreans.
So honestly, because the Asian students are focused on a goal. I mean, they're one big deal. If you don't make it in your whole life is based on that goal, you've had it. You're gonna be burned out. I mean, so, and in Finland, they operate on a process, and the teacher is like, instead of, I get made an A, it's actually, I had this professor.
When does education become liberal in K through 12 in a country? Because our version of liberal education would involve it would involve world history, right? But here on campus, we teach Texas government, right? And Texas history and things like that. So is there a liberal component in that, like the classics or the great works or art and drama? And,
That's what I was talking about, smart, how to be smart. Are you
Right.
well versed in critical thinking?
Yeah, because they're saying critical thinking is a key component of this, but, and you keep saying time on task under your breath, so there's a base of knowledge and a body of knowledge that comes just from not face texting and my booking, But once you accumulate that body of knowledge, I think for us in this room, we just love the idea of like, okay, I'm gonna analyze and synthesize and develop and build some beautiful new piece of art that's never been done based on this canon. So how do you determine that in PISA, with 12th graders from around the world with 61 questions in a body sample? And that's the key question in our field, in your field, in everyone's field here is, what is intelligence? And the biggest issue is, I think, how do you determine the metric? And so the metric's biased, and we determine the metric in our culture, because that's how we evaluate within our culture.
Like, am I able to do math? Am I able to use math to do theology?
Right.
Something like that, right?
Right.
Able to draw down all kinds of things that come with good understanding, and that's outlook on things.
Like a moral education.
Yeah, sure.
Mathematics, literature education, biology.
What do they do about different students? We're not working with white mice here in the lab. We're working with students that have different abilities. And we focus on that in the United States. And that comes down to, I think it's Jeff talked about teacher education, investing in your teachers, your professors, excuse me. What did they do there? Did they invest under their mentors and get that, or did they have content specialists and specialists dealing with people who have learning disabilities? Did they talk about that? Because I'm from the neuroscience part of the world, and we're not all wired the same. So how did they address those students? Was that within their training, investing in their professors and their teachers, like Jeff was talking about we would do? Or did they send them off to specialists after school?
I'm coming at this from a literacy, reading, language arts background, where I totally believe that if kids are avid readers and writers, they're going to do well on any test. And I just mentioned one study in New York, and then go back to that question, because they did a study in New York. Not a study. It's not a study. It's a charter school in Harlem area. They're very poor students, coming in the lottery system. But those kids are reading an hour and a half a day and writing an hour and a half a day. Finland they're reading and writing a lot. They don't just answer multiple choice questions. They write 20-page essays, right? Or that was after college. And so it sounded to me like they don't send them out. It's the teacher. Teachers are very well trained. Teacher zooms in on those kids and gives them that extra help. Just like in our classrooms, if kids are struggling, the teacher should be individualizing for those kids and teaching them the strategies.
How many people have gone to training for learning disabilities, be able to detect it, be able to pick it up, and know what to do with it once they know it's there? Anybody in the room? I mean, there's a couple of, but look, we're all professors, and we all have these people sitting in our classroom. So how do you address that?
Yeah.
We don't have, and it goes back to the professional development aspect.
So I'm reading. I have a master's and doctorate in reading, and we're not taught that there's a label reading disability. I mean, that comes out of a special ed model. But I don't think the other countries put labels on the kids. I don't believe in putting labels on the kids either. If a child is struggling with reading, we find out how they're struggling, and we give them the strategies they need and give them lots of time to read, to catch up, and books they can read. And so there are strategies for that. But I think what we do in this country too much is put a label on them, and then we just expect all the way through college they're going to be dyslexic, or they're going to be learning disabled. They have to have the problems read to them. So on their state test, some of the kids have been going out to get the problems, the questions read to them, and multiple choice stems read to them. I don't think that's happening this year, so the schools are getting really, concerned about that. But
My son is 7, he's in 2nd grade, and he got in trouble yesterday because he had his head down on the desk while the teacher was talking. I said, well, why'd you put your head down? Are you tired? He said, no, it's too much. And that's why I asked the question about play, because if he doesn't finish, he doesn't get to play. He has to stay and study in 2nd grade, and it drives me crazy.
Yeah.
One thing I said about rigor, too, is that we're all into this rigor thing. This whole nation's talking about rigor because rigor was in this country. They have a different definition of rigor. She talked about if you're watching kids whiz through a worksheet, that's not rigor. She talked about that that school in New York City where those kids are reading an hour and a half a day and writing an hour and a half a day and having choice of That's rigor, okay? So I think the whole definition of rigor has gotten off, and we think kids, it has to be hard. Kids can't have recess anymore. You know, we have to have test prep, and
I remember back in school when the students had trouble reading. Well, they went to special reading classes, the other kids got recess. So here, do the hardest thing that's possible for you to do more and get penalized for it. That helps.
So can America be, we have the product, achievement test, and we have the process, the teacher, communal type thing. In America, I'm assuming it's a hybrid, where you have like a process of product. You're actually being tested along, that's what we do. We're like melding these things. Is that the conclusion? Did they ever talk about?
talking inclusion,
Well, I'm talking about, you know,
the way the kids are being tested.
yeah, like, it's not so much a process, it's a process of products.
Well, and language arts is a process, and so, I mean, sorry, I mean, it's all,
But the focus
yeah,
on
it's,
the.
they have to be, and a lot of people don't understand this, is they wanna focus on those isolated skills, because our, you know, state board center our curriculum DC to be written, so it's all an isolated skills curriculum. Unfortunately, but our test is still a process test. So in order to do well on that test, they have to be avid readers who can think critically. It's a critical thinking test. It's not a test where they can go find the answer. In writing, it's not a, it's multiple choice, but it's, they're reading a piece and punctuating it and capitalizing, doing all the conventions and all this, and then they're, have a multiple choice test on how did you revise this sentence, you know, so it's, and then they write a sample. So
We are
it's a process
test centers.
It was interesting that you called it a hybrid. I think in the book they referred to that hybrid as lack of consensus on what was important was the process.
Yeah, and these places, they're settled, they're really, really convicted about what they need to be, how their society should structure things. Yeah.
Well, thank you all for coming. Everybody